Daniel was the only son of a well-known senator, but despite being born into a powerful family, he never carried himself with arrogance. People in the community often said that Daniel was different from the children of other political families. While many expected him to show off his father's influence or demand special treatment, Daniel chose a quieter life. He preferred being around ordinary people, listening to their problems, and sharing moments that made life simple. From his early school years, Daniel stood out because of his kindness. Teachers noticed that he never let anyone feel left behind. If one of his classmates struggled with homework, Daniel was the first to offer help. If someone was being ignored during playtime, he would walk over and invite them to join. That sense of compassion only grew as he got older. Even though his family lived in a big house and his father had a busy schedule filled with meetings and responsibilities, Daniel enjoyed spending time in neighborhoods that many politicians would ignore. In those neighborhoods, he found his true friends. They were not wealthy, nor did they carry big names, but they were genuine, honest, and full of life. Daniel often joined them in community projects, painting old walls, cleaning playgrounds, or organizing small reading clubs for children. He believed that change began with small actions, and even if his father's speeches reached thousands, he wanted to reach people through everyday kindness. Yet, Daniel's life was not always easy. He carried the weight of expectations that came from being the senator's son. People often whispered about him, wondering if he would follow in his father's footsteps, or if he would fail to live up to the family name. Some admired him, but others were quick to judge. They believed that no matter how kind he seemed, he was still privileged, still protected by the power of his father's position. Daniel never denied his privilege, but he also never used it as a shield. He wanted people to see him for who he was, not for the title attached to his last name. At home, Daniel's relationship with his father was complex but filled with love. The senator was a man of discipline, often buried under files and political responsibilities, yet he cared deeply for his son. He often advised Daniel to be careful, to stay away from unnecessary trouble, because the public was always watching. But Daniel was not one to hide behind walls. He wanted to experience life the way ordinary people did, without bodyguards following him at every step. Sometimes, this caused small disagreements between father and son, but at the end of the day, both understood each other. Daniel respected his father's worries, and the senator admired his son's courage to stay grounded. One summer evening, Daniel walked through the streets of his community with his closest friend, Marcus. They passed by a local park where children played with laughter echoing in the air. Daniel stopped to greet some of them, bending down to ask about their schoolwork and dreams. The children loved him, not because of his father's name, but because he always listened. He carried no pride, no distance. To them, he was like an older brother who cared. Marcus, watching from a distance, often teased him, saying, "Daniel, you talk to everyone like you're running for office." Daniel would laugh and reply, "No, I just want them to know they matter." But behind these warm moments, a quiet tension always existed. Daniel had felt it many times: the stares from certain police officers when he drove his car through wealthier neighborhoods, the suspicion when he walked into a store late at night, the questions about why someone like him belonged in certain spaces. Even though his father held influence, Daniel knew prejudice was not something that titles could erase. Sometimes, he ignored it, convincing himself it was just his imagination. Other times, it stayed with him like a shadow, reminding him that life was not the same for everyone. Still, Daniel refused to let bitterness grow in his heart. He believed in giving people a chance, in focusing on the goodness around him. He volunteered at youth programs, teaching young boys the value of respect and hard work. He often told them, "Your background does not define your future. Your choices do." The boys listened carefully, some of them inspired to follow in his footsteps. Parents in the community trusted Daniel, because he carried himself with humility and showed genuine care. On weekends, Daniel would often visit his grandmother, who lived in a quiet part of town. She was the one who had taught him the importance of kindness. Sitting on her porch, she would remind him that no matter how powerful his father became, it was the heart that people remembered, not the name. Titles come and go, my boy, she would say, but how you treat people stays forever. Daniel carried those words like a compass, guiding his steps. Life seemed peaceful on the surface, but Daniel was unaware that his choices and identity would soon place him at the center of a storm. There were those in authority who did not see him as the senator's son, or as the kind young man admired by his community. To them, he was just another face to control, another body to question, another person to mistrust because of deep-rooted prejudice. Daniel, with his open heart and faith in goodness, did not imagine how quickly things could change. For now, he enjoyed the rhythm of his days, the laughter of children, the comfort of friendships, the quiet lessons from his grandmother, and the love of his family. He believed that life was about building connections, not walls. But destiny had already begun weaving threads that would soon test his strength, his identity, and his family's faith in justice. As Daniel prepared for another week of community work, he looked in the mirror and saw not just the son of a senator, but a young man determined to live with dignity. He did not know that one night, a single encounter would change everything, and his story would no longer belong to just him, but to a nation struggling to face its truth. That evening, Daniel had attended a community meeting focused on local youth programs. It had been a long day, filled with planning sessions, discussions, and encouragement for the children he cared about. As the meeting ended, he felt satisfied knowing that small steps could make a difference in the lives of those around him. Together with his friend Marcus, he walked to his car parked a few blocks away. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of streetlights, and the air was warm with the calm of summer. Daniel started the car, enjoying the familiar hum of the engine. He and Marcus chatted about plans for the upcoming week, laughing over small jokes and sharing stories from their childhood. The world seemed peaceful in that moment, as if nothing could disturb the ordinary rhythm of their lives. Daniel felt safe. He always believed that good behavior, honesty, and respect would protect him from harm. Little did he know that this belief would soon be tested in a way he could never imagine. Without warning, flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He knew the rules: pull over immediately, keep calm, stay polite. But even as he followed protocol, an unease settled over him. He could feel the tension in the air, a sense of suspicion from the officers that had nothing to do with him personally. Daniel wondered briefly if this was a simple traffic stop or if something else had triggered it. He carefully pulled to the side of the road, lowering the window as instructed. The officers approached with serious expressions, their eyes scanning him and Marcus in a way that felt cold and questioning. Daniel greeted them politely, explaining where he had been and why he was out so late. He offered his license and registration without hesitation. Everything he did followed the rules perfectly, yet he noticed the officers' impatience, a kind of dismissal in their tone. "You know why we stopped you?" one of the officers asked, his voice sharp. Daniel shook his head. He tried to remain calm, explaining again that he had been attending a community event. His words were calm, careful, and honest, but the officers seemed unwilling to listen. Their expressions hardened, and the tension between them grew. Marcus, sitting silently beside him, could sense the danger and felt a tight knot of fear in his stomach. The officers demanded Daniel step out of the car. He complied immediately, knowing that arguing would only make the situation worse. As he moved, Daniel noticed that they were watching him closely, their hands hovering near their belts, ready to act at the smallest perceived provocation. Daniel's heart raced. He had never experienced this kind of hostility before, at least not directed at him so personally. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words seemed to get lost in the charged air around them. The confrontation escalated quickly. The officer's suspicion turned into aggression, not because Daniel had done anything wrong, but because their judgment was clouded by prejudice. Every gesture he made was scrutinized and misinterpreted. The calm, respectful demeanor he had always maintained suddenly seemed irrelevant. Daniel could feel the fear growing, not just for himself, but for Marcus, who had always been his loyal companion. Daniel realized that the encounter was spiraling beyond reason. He tried to stay composed, raising his hand slightly to show he was not a threat. He explained that he was the son of a local senator, hoping that mentioning his father might help de-escalate the tension. To his surprise, it made little difference. The officer's bias ran deeper than a simple respect for titles or names. To them, he was just another young man in a place they deemed suspicious. Their assumptions, fueled by prejudice, overpowered any rational explanation he offered. As the situation worsened, Daniel felt a mix of disbelief and fear. He had always believed that honesty, humility, and a good reputation could protect him from harm. He had followed all the rules, treated people with respect, and tried to live a life guided by kindness. Yet, in those moments, he realized that none of these qualities mattered when prejudice and assumptions ruled the minds of those in power. It was a harsh lesson, one that no young man wants to learn. Daniel's mind raced. He thought of his family, his father's words, and the community that trusted him. He thought of the children he had encouraged to dream big and act with integrity. Could this incident undo all the good he had tried to build? Could it undo the sense of safety and hope he carried with him every day? The thought was painful, but he tried to stay focused. He needed to remain calm, to think clearly, and to survive the moment without giving the officers any reason to escalate further. The tension continued to build. Marcus quietly offered support, speaking only when necessary, trying to calm Daniel with gentle words. They both knew that any sudden movement or word could be misinterpreted, but silence was also heavy, filled with the pressure of the unknown. Every second felt like an eternity. Daniel felt frustration rising alongside fear, knowing that the officer's treatment was unfair, biased, and unnecessary. He wished there was a way to make them see him as a human being, not as a stereotype or a threat. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The officers demanded explanations for trivial matters, checking the car, questioning Daniel and Marcus repeatedly. Each question, each gesture, reinforced the reality that prejudice had taken control. Daniel wanted to scream, to argue, to make them understand, but he knew that resistance might only make things worse. He stayed silent, choosing caution over confrontation, while frustration burned quietly inside him. At some point, Daniel realized that this encounter was not just about him, it was a reflection of a larger problem in society. People like him, despite privilege or connections, could still face prejudice and injustice. Others without his protection might not even survive such encounters without harm. The thought made his heart heavy. He felt sadness for those who had no voice, who had suffered quietly for years, simply because of assumptions made about their appearance or background. Even as he processed these emotions, Daniel focused on staying composed. He knew that his response in this moment would shape what happened next. He kept his hands visible, spoke softly but clearly, and tried to maintain eye contact without challenging the officer's authority. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move could trigger violence, one misinterpreted word could escalate the situation. The officers continued their inspection and questioning, moving slowly, deliberately, as if trying to assert power rather than seek understanding. Daniel and Marcus endured the scrutiny, aware that this was more than a routine stop. It had become a test of endurance, patience, and resilience in the face of unfair treatment. Daniel's training in humility and kindness guided him, helping him remain calm even when frustration threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, after what felt like hours, the officers began to relent slightly, though the tension did not fully ease. Daniel's relief was cautious. He knew that while he might leave that night without immediate harm, the experience had changed him. The world was not always fair, and assumptions rooted in prejudice could turn ordinary encounters into life-altering experiences. He silently vowed that he would not let this moment destroy his spirit, though he understood that scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. As they drove away, Daniel reflected on the events. He thought about his father, his community, and the children who looked up to him. He thought about Marcus, who had stayed by his side through the ordeal. He realized that courage was not about resisting authority or proving power, it was about maintaining dignity, calm, and compassion, even when treated unfairly. Though shaken and exhausted, Daniel also felt a spark of determination. He knew that the incident could not be ignored. It was a reminder that change was needed, that people needed to be held accountable, and that no one should face prejudice alone. While the night had been frightening, it had also revealed the strength of his character, the loyalty of his friends, and the support of those who truly cared about him. Driving home slowly, Daniel promised himself that he would turn this painful experience into a lesson not just for himself, but for the community and the world around him. He would not let fear dictate his life, nor would he allow injustice to silence him. It was the beginning of a journey he could never have imagined, a journey that would test every part of him and reveal the deep truths of society, power, and human resilience. The news of the incident spread quickly. Even though Daniel had been careful to avoid making it a public matter initially, someone in the area had witnessed part of what happened. A short video circulated on social media, showing a tense exchange with the officers. People began to recognize Daniel, not just as the senator's son, but as a young man who had endured a humiliating and frightening situation. The reactions were immediate: shock, anger, and disbelief swept across the city. People could not understand how someone like Daniel, someone who had done nothing wrong, could be treated with such hostility. Daniel and Marcus tried to maintain some normalcy, but it was difficult. Every time they left their house, they noticed strangers staring, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. His friends and neighbors reached out, offering support and expressing outrage at what had happened. Messages flooded his phone, some kind, some concerned, all reflecting the tension between disbelief and empathy. Daniel realized that the incident had become bigger than he ever expected. It was no longer a private ordeal, it had become a matter that drew attention across communities. At home, the senator was deeply worried. He had always feared for Daniel's safety in the world outside politics, and now his fears had materialized in the worst possible way. He called his son repeatedly, checking on his physical and emotional well-being. Daniel tried to stay strong, but he felt shaken. The incident was not just a violation of his rights, it was an attack on his sense of security, his trust in the system, and his belief that good behavior could protect him. Daniel's injuries, while not life-threatening, were enough to leave visible marks. Bruises, cuts, and soreness reminded him constantly of that night. Yet, the deeper wounds were the ones that could not be seen. The fear, the humiliation, and the shock lingered in his mind, replaying the events over and over. He found it difficult to sleep, haunted by the memory of being misunderstood, mistrusted, and treated unfairly. Every sound outside his home, every knock on the door, stirred anxiety he had never felt before. The senator, determined to seek justice for his son, began making calls to colleagues, legal advisors, and civil rights groups. However, it quickly became apparent that the fight would not be simple. Many people, even in positions of power, hesitated to take a strong stand. The police department issued statements claiming the officers had acted within their rights and that no wrongdoing had occurred. Words intended to calm the public only heightened the anger of those who saw the truth of the situation. For Daniel, it was a bitter realization: the system that was supposed to protect him and his family seemed reluctant to acknowledge the injustice. Daniel tried to regain a sense of control. He met with lawyers and civil rights advocates who explained the legal options available. They talked about filing complaints, seeking investigations, and pursuing accountability. While he appreciated their guidance, Daniel could not ignore the emotional toll. He had always believed that honesty, patience, and respect could navigate the world safely, but now he had to fight against a system that often ignored fairness in favor of self-protection. Marcus remained by his side, a constant source of support and comfort. They would talk late into the night, reflecting on the incident and trying to find a way forward. "We can't let this define you, Daniel," Marcus would say. "But we can't ignore it either. It's time people see the truth." Daniel nodded, understanding that speaking out was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable or frightening. He realized that silence might protect him temporarily, but it would allow injustice to continue unchecked. The community's response was powerful. People organized small gatherings, peaceful demonstrations, and public discussions. They wanted to highlight not only Daniel's case but also the experiences of countless others who had faced unfair treatment. Daniel, though overwhelmed, felt a growing sense of responsibility. He understood that his story could shine a light on systemic problems, creating awareness that might prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. The senator, while proud of his son's courage, struggled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he wanted to shield Daniel from public scrutiny, fearing it would only make things worse. On the other hand, he recognized the importance of standing up for justice, not just for his son, but for the larger community. Private meetings, phone calls, and political discussions filled his days, leaving him exhausted and anxious. He often worried that the pressure of public attention would be too heavy for Daniel to bear. Despite all the support, Daniel's frustration grew. He had followed the law, treated people with respect, and sought to make the world a better place. Yet, the officers involved were defending themselves, relying on policies and technicalities to escape accountability. It seemed that no matter what he did, prejudice had already decided the outcome in their minds. Daniel struggled to reconcile the world he believed in with the reality he had just faced, a world where justice was not guaranteed, and bias could overshadow truth. The media began to cover the story, carefully choosing words to balance sensitivity and reporting. Interviews with Daniel, his friends, and community members offered insight into his character and the night's events. Viewers saw not only the fear and pain he had experienced but also his courage and commitment to speaking out. Even though the attention was overwhelming, Daniel felt it was necessary. He wanted people to understand that this was not just a personal attack, it was a reflection of broader societal issues that needed addressing. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel slowly recovered physically. But the emotional impact lingered. He found himself thinking twice about going out at night, noticing every officer, every stranger, every sound with heightened awareness. The experience had changed him, teaching lessons about vulnerability, resilience, and the reality of prejudice. Yet, through the fear and pain, a determination grew. He was not going to allow this incident to destroy his spirit or silence his voice. Community leaders, activists, and civil rights organizations rallied around Daniel's case, offering guidance, platforms, and advocacy. He met with young people who had faced similar situations, sharing stories, fears, and hopes. For Daniel, these connections were both comforting and inspiring. He saw that his struggle could empower others, showing that even in moments of injustice, courage and unity could create change. The senator continued to push for accountability, facing obstacles that revealed how entrenched the system could be. Meetings with officials often ended in frustration, legal procedures dragged on, and the officers involved remained largely protected. Yet, Daniel and his family refused to give up. They held private discussions about strategy, public messaging, and long-term plans to ensure that justice, even if delayed, would eventually be served. Daniel realized that the incident had become a turning point in his life. It forced him to confront harsh realities, understand the complexity of social systems, and recognize the resilience needed to fight for fairness. He learned that courage was not only about facing physical danger, it was also about enduring emotional trials, speaking the truth, and standing firm against injustice, even when the odds were stacked against him. In quiet moments, Daniel reflected on the journey so far. He remembered the children he had mentored, the community projects he had supported, and the lessons from his grandmother about kindness and integrity. He understood that these values would guide him through the challenges ahead. While the night of the attack had left scars, it had also shaped him into a young man with a clearer sense of purpose, empathy, and determination. The path forward remained uncertain. Legal battles would take time, public opinion could shift, and the officers involved might continue to resist accountability. But Daniel, strengthened by support, love, and his own moral compass, knew he could endure. He was determined not to let fear dictate his life, not to let prejudice silence him, and not to allow injustice to go unnoticed. The incident, though painful, had ignited a spark of resolve to seek truth, fairness, and lasting change. As Daniel continued to navigate this difficult period, he realized that his story was no longer just his own. It had become a symbol for those who had been silenced, ignored, or marginalized. His experience highlighted the importance of courage, advocacy, and community support. And while the journey toward justice would be long and arduous, Daniel understood that every step he took could inspire others to stand up, speak out, and demand fairness in a world that often seemed indifferent to truth. The days after the attack felt like a storm that never ended. Daniel struggled with pain, frustration, and an endless stream of questions. He tried to focus on schoolwork, community projects, and family moments, but the memory of that night always lingered. It haunted him quietly, showing up in sudden flashes, a glance from a stranger, the sound of sirens, or even the sight of flashing lights in a movie. Every small reminder made him relieve the fear and humiliation he had faced, and yet, it also strengthened a quiet determination growing inside him. Daniel's family rallied around him, offering love, patience, and support. His father, the senator, used every resource he could to seek justice, calling lawyers, human rights advocates, and trusted officials. But even with all the influence in the world, the process was slow. Investigations were delayed, statements were twisted, and officers involved maintained a calm, official front that suggested nothing had happened. Daniel realized that fighting for fairness was not just about proving the truth, it was about battling an entire system that often protected its own. Civil rights organizations soon joined the case. Activists, lawyers, and community leaders recognized Daniel's story as a representation of a much larger problem. Prejudice, abuse of power, and systemic injustice were not limited to one night or one person. Daniel began attending meetings and strategy sessions, where he listened carefully to advice about legal procedures, media interaction, and advocacy. It was overwhelming at times. The details were complicated, and the decisions were heavy. Yet, he felt a sense of purpose. This fight was bigger than him, and he could not turn away. The media attention was intense. News channels ran stories, social media buzzed with discussions, and journalists sought interviews. Some coverage was sympathetic, highlighting Daniel's character, his kindness, and the injustice he had faced. Others focused on controversy, questioning motives, and exaggerating details. Daniel had to learn quickly how to navigate the public eye. He realized that words could inspire or harm, and he needed to be careful without staying silent. Speaking out became an act of courage, requiring calmness, clarity, and resilience that tested him every day. Even at home, the pressure was visible. His father spent long hours on calls and meetings, balancing political responsibilities with the family's personal struggle. Daniel could see the worry etched into his father's face, the sleepless nights, and the constant tension. His mother tried to provide comfort, preparing meals, reminding him to rest, and holding long conversations that helped him release his fear. The family shared quiet moments of solidarity, knowing that their love and unity were the foundation of their strength in the face of adversity. Despite support, Daniel felt moments of despair. The officers involved acted as if nothing had happened, continuing their routine while he and his family bore the consequences. The legal system, while well-intentioned in theory, moved slowly, often frustrating those who sought timely justice. Daniel realized that fairness was not always immediate, and sometimes those in power could ignore truth to protect themselves. These lessons were painful, and the young man had to develop patience, endurance, and strategic thinking to navigate a world that was not always just. Community support remained a lifeline. Local leaders organized gatherings, encouraged dialogue, and ensured that Daniel's story reached the people who could make a difference. Peaceful rallies, discussions with city officials, and interviews with young students reinforced the importance of awareness and advocacy. Daniel began speaking at some events, sharing his experience in calm, clear words. He wanted people to understand that the problem was not about individual anger or revenge, it was about ensuring that no one else suffered silently, that every injustice had a voice. Daniel's recovery was also a personal journey. The physical scars of the attack healed slowly, but the emotional impact required patience, reflection, and support. He met with counselors who helped him process trauma, understand fear, and regain confidence. Through these sessions, he learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the ability to continue despite it. Every small step forward, whether walking outside alone or speaking at a public gathering, became a victory in reclaiming control over his life. School became another challenge. Some classmates were sympathetic, others were curious, and a few whispered judgments that reminded him of the night of the attack. Daniel had to navigate these social dynamics carefully. He did not let judgment define him. Instead, he focused on maintaining his integrity, showing through actions that he remained the same person, kind, thoughtful, and determined. Over time, respect grew among those around him, and he became a quiet example of resilience and dignity. Daniel's relationship with Marcus deepened during this time. Marcus had stayed by his side through every phone call, meeting, and emotional moment. He reminded Daniel of the value of friendship, loyalty, and courage. Together, they developed strategies for advocacy, worked on community programs, and supported each other emotionally. Marcus became not just a friend, but a partner in facing a complex world that was often unfair, unpredictable, and biased. Political and social pressure increased. The senator's office received letters, emails, and calls from citizens demanding accountability. Some officials were hesitant, fearing public backlash or conflict with colleagues. Others offered genuine support, recognizing the importance of fairness and transparency. Daniel watched closely, learning that advocacy required not only passion but also strategic thinking. Patience, timing, and careful communication were as important as courage and moral clarity. Daniel also discovered the power of storytelling. By sharing his experience honestly, without exaggeration or anger, he inspired others to speak out. People from different communities reached him with similar stories, expressing gratitude that someone had given them hope. Young people wrote letters, sharing how his courage had motivated them to stand up for themselves and others. Daniel realized that even a painful experience could be transformed into a source of empowerment, spreading lessons far beyond the initial event. The long fight for justice revealed the complexity of the world he had always believed in. Kindness, honesty, and diligence were not always enough to protect someone from injustice. The system could be slow, biased, and resistant to change. Yet, Daniel also saw that perseverance, community support, and courage could challenge unfairness. He began to understand that life required more than personal goodness, it required advocacy, resilience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Over time, Daniel became more confident in public speaking and advocacy. He met with journalists, youth groups, and community organizations to discuss the importance of fairness and accountability. Each engagement tested him emotionally, but also strengthened his resolve. He began to see that while the attack had caused harm, it had also given him a platform to influence change and ensure that others would not be ignored. Despite small victories, Daniel and his family faced setbacks. Legal processes were slow, the officers involved maintained denials, and some officials were unwilling to confront the truth. Each delay, each obstacle, tested their patience. Daniel learned to balance frustration with strategic thinking, understanding that change often required endurance and careful planning rather than immediate results. Through all this, Daniel's values remained intact. He continued volunteering, mentoring children, and participating in community projects. These activities grounded him, reminding him that life was not only about battles with injustice but also about contributing positively, spreading hope, and showing that goodness could persist even in difficult circumstances. Daniel began to see the broader lesson: injustice could be challenged through courage, strategy, and solidarity. Individuals alone could be vulnerable, but communities united could create lasting impact. This understanding became a guiding principle in his life, shaping the way he interacted with friends, family, and society at large. Months passed, and Daniel continued the fight with unwavering determination. Each meeting, protest, or media interaction brought small steps toward accountability. Though full justice remained uncertain, he had transformed the pain of that night into purpose, using it to inspire, educate, and advocate. He became a symbol of resilience, a young man who refused to be silenced, even when facing a system that often seemed indifferent to truth. In quiet moments, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. The road had been difficult, filled with fear, frustration, and challenges that tested him beyond anything he had imagined. Yet, he also recognized growth, courage, and an inner strength he had not fully realized before. The attack had changed him, yes, but it had also shaped him into a person capable of facing life's unfairness with dignity and persistence. He understood that the long fight for justice was about more than himself. It was about every person who had been silenced, ignored, or harmed by prejudice. It was about showing the world that fairness was worth fighting for, even when the outcome was uncertain. And while the journey was far from over, Daniel knew that each step forward, each voice raised, each act of courage mattered. Despite the months of struggle and advocacy, Daniel could feel the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. The legal battles, media attention, and constant pressure to speak out had taken a toll. Each day brought hope followed by disappointment. The officers involved continued to deny wrongdoing, and the system moved slowly, frustrating everyone who wanted justice. Daniel understood that no amount of influence, courage, or advocacy could instantly erase the harm done. The fight for accountability was long, and patience had become both a necessity and a burden. At home, the senator and his family tried to create a safe space for Daniel. They encouraged him to focus on healing, to spend time with friends, and to remember the good in his life. Yet, the memory of that night remained vivid. Every moment of peace was interrupted by flashes of fear and frustration, reminders that life had changed irreversibly. Daniel sometimes wondered if he would ever feel completely safe or if the sense of injustice would remain a shadow over his future. The community continued to support him. Children he had mentored brought small gifts and letters, expressing admiration and gratitude. Friends organized quiet gatherings to celebrate his courage and remind him that he was not alone. These gestures were comforting, yet they also carried a reminder that the world could be unfair, and that courage often came with invisible costs. Daniel realized that his life had become a symbol of resilience, of injustice, and of the need for change, but that symbolism could not shield him from the personal pain he endured. Daniel tried to continue his daily life, attending school, volunteering, and engaging with the community. Each step required immense effort. Simple activities like going out with friends or walking through his neighborhood became acts of bravery. He noticed the stares of strangers, the cautious glances of authority figures, and the unspoken judgments in public spaces. Every interaction reminded him that the world had changed, that his innocence had been disrupted, and that the consequences of that one night would follow him indefinitely. His health, both physical and emotional, was affected by the trauma. Sleepless nights, anxiety, and lingering pain made even routine tasks challenging. Counseling sessions helped him process some of the fear and frustration, but the scars of that night remained. Daniel learned that healing was not linear, it came in small steps, sometimes followed by setbacks. Each moment of progress, however minor, became a victory that reminded him of his resilience and inner strength. The senator worked tirelessly to support his son, but even his influence could not fully protect Daniel. Meetings with officials often ended in frustration, and promises of accountability were delayed or ignored. The officers involved faced minimal consequences, a reality that was bitter and disheartening for the family. Daniel saw the limitations of power and privilege firsthand. Despite their best efforts, they could not control every outcome. The injustice was real, and it remained a harsh reminder that fairness was not guaranteed, even for those with resources or recognition. Daniel's relationships with his peers were also affected. Some friends admired his courage, while others were intimidated or uncertain how to act around him. He encountered whispers, questions, and occasional judgment, reminding him that public attention could be isolating. Yet, through these challenges, he remained steadfast in his values. Daniel chose integrity over bitterness, kindness over anger, and truth over fear. These decisions were not always easy, but they defined the person he had become after the attack. As the months continued, Daniel reflected deeply on his experience. He understood that life had handed him an unfair challenge, one that would leave lasting marks. Yet he also saw the lessons it offered: resilience in the face of adversity, the importance of speaking out, and the power of community and solidarity. While the attack had been violent in its injustice, it had revealed the strength, compassion, and determination he carried within himself. Daniel realized that even though the world could be cruel, he could choose how to respond, and that response would shape his legacy. The family faced moments of despair. Each setback in the legal system felt like a personal failure, a reminder that the world did not always reward justice. Daniel's father struggled with guilt, wondering if there was more he could have done to protect his son. The senator had spent years advocating for others, yet he could not fully shield Daniel from the harsh reality of prejudice. These feelings weighed heavily on the family, yet they remained united, drawing strength from each other and from the support of the community. Despite the challenges, Daniel continued to speak out. He shared his experience with other young people, encouraging them to stand up against injustice in their own lives. He explained that courage did not mean acting without fear, but rather facing challenges with integrity and determination. Daniel's voice became a source of inspiration, reminding others that even in moments of difficulty, action and advocacy could make a difference. His story resonated beyond his city, reaching communities who had faced similar struggles, creating a sense of shared understanding and hope. However, the bitter reality remained: the officers who had attacked him continued their lives largely unscathed. The legal system offered no true closure. Daniel felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the physical and emotional scars, but for the fairness he had hoped would prevail. He realized that sometimes, even with courage, advocacy, and truth, justice could be delayed, compromised, or incomplete. This understanding was painful, yet it strengthened his resolve to continue fighting for change, even if the outcome was uncertain. Daniel's health continued to be a concern. The lingering injuries from that night caused discomfort, and the emotional stress affected his energy and focus. Simple tasks required greater effort, and he often felt drained. Yet, even in these moments of weakness, he found strength in the people who cared about him. Marcus, family members, and supportive community members reminded him that he was not alone, that his struggles mattered, and that his voice could continue to influence others positively. The months passed, and Daniel began to accept that some aspects of the situation could not be changed. The officers involved had faced minimal consequences, and the system that allowed their behavior remained flawed. Yet he also saw the impact his story had on others. Awareness had grown, conversations had started, and small reforms in local communities were being discussed. Daniel understood that while he could not undo the harm, he could transform it into lessons for the future. His experience could prevent others from suffering in silence, and that realization offered a measure of solace. In quiet moments, Daniel reflected on his journey. The attack had been life-changing, filled with fear, injustice, and emotional pain. Yet it had also revealed his strength, resilience, and ability to inspire others. He understood that life would not always be fair, but he could choose how to respond. Courage, compassion, and integrity remained his guiding principles, and he vowed to continue living by them, no matter the challenges ahead. The attack had left him with a bitter reality: the world was not always just, and the system did not always protect the innocent. But Daniel had grown through the experience. He had learned the value of persistence, the importance of community, and the power of standing up for truth. His story, though marked by pain, had become a source of inspiration, teaching others about resilience, hope, and the necessity of advocacy. Even as he faced lingering sadness, Daniel's determination never wavered. He continued volunteering, mentoring, and speaking out about injustice. He shared his story with schools, community organizations, and youth groups, ensuring that the lessons he had learned would reach others. The experience had changed him, but it had also given him purpose. He realized that life's challenges, even those caused by unfairness, could be transformed into opportunities for growth, learning, and influence. In the end, Daniel's life became a symbol of both the bitter reality of injustice and the enduring power of courage. He had faced prejudice, unfair treatment, and systemic failure, yet he had remained steadfast in his values. His story reminded everyone that life could be cruel, but resilience, integrity, and advocacy could leave a lasting impact. Though the officers faced minimal consequences, Daniel's influence and example reached far beyond that night, touching lives and inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and fight for fairness in their own communities.